and it could throw everything into a mess. There you go, Texas, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, K-State, Iowa State.
Yeah, I would love to see the ultimate chaos after this week if everybody is at 6-2 in the conference.
Kansas plays Kansas State.
Well, I guess that wouldn't
Iowa
happen,
State hosts Texas. That Oklahoma game, they bounced back with a vengeance, and now in the middle of it. Now, if you don't use that link, and I'm asking you to do it, it's interesting. For example, if you were to just take Iowa State beating Texas Saturday night, just throw it out there. It throws everything into a haywire. So there is a chance that you could have Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Kansas State in a tie for second. And I think if that's the case, Kansas State's going to end up playing in the Big 12 championship game. I'm not trying to talk against it, but use that link if you want when you get confused on that. Now, here are the games this week in the Big 12. Oklahoma, early on against a flailing BYU. There's a lot of teams in the Big 12 who could fit that description. Cincinnati, West Virginia. Baylor, for the 5th consecutive week, is on ESPN+. That's where they are. And TCU, of course, after playing well, coming back with a nice second half, but falling short against Texas. Oklahoma State, Houston, UCF, Texas Tech. That's going to be interesting after what we saw this past weekend. Kansas State in Lawrence, and then Texas on the road against against Iowa State and Ames on a night game at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, it's an interesting schedule this week. That Texas and Iowa State game, to me, the most interesting one. This is one of the last shots of the originals, or the left behind ones, to get Texas. And if they did that, if I used the link that you sent, if Iowa State wins and everybody else that's got their same record wins, Kansas State and Oklahoma would be in the title game.
Yep, Texas would drop to 4th.
Yeah.
In the tiebreaker. 4th if they lose that game Saturday night, if the others above Iowa State also win. Now, the games we saw, we spent time a little bit on them, but let's go back and discuss the games that we saw. Let's start with Texas and TCU. Jonathan Brooks out. Ewers had a big pass to Mitchell at a couple of touchdowns. He's been fantastic. Worthy was great. They just had too much firepower. But you can almost sense, even from Steve Sarkisian, that Texas is not putting teams away. They're winning, though. They're 9-1, but they're not putting teams away.
Yeah, this didn't have as much sizzle to it as, more recent meetings when TCU's been in the top 25 and been a lot hotter. But then again, Texas hasn't always been as hot as they are. So there was still, a lot of intrigue here. And just the fact that TCU has gotten their number or had their number on multiple occasions over the last few years. Not that it's been one-sided by any means, but TCU, as much as anybody's been able to kind of jump up and be that thorn in Texas' side. And so they nearly were once again, and this time it was about as improbable as any of the meetings because of the fact that TCU is just not a very good team, really. I mean, 4-5 rolling in, now 4-6. They're favored by, you want to know how bad Baylor is? We'll get to that. TCU's favored 14, by 2 touchdowns. Yeah. God almighty. But I was very impressed by TCU's resiliency to make this a game. Got out early and, showed pretty clearly in that first quarter that, hey, this could be a little bit of a tussle. And then Texas, it looked like they were just going to run away with it in the second quarter when they went on their run. But, yeah, TCU hung around and then had the huge fourth quarter, obviously. Amani Bailey with a big game and a couple of big touchdown catches there in the final few minutes to make this one a little bit too close for comfort for the Longhorns and make them sweat a little bit. So not the upset that a lot of people were rooting for, but a closer game than I actually expected. I thought Texas would kind of handle them, and at halftime it seemed like that was probably going to be the case, up by 20. But, good fight by the Frogs, and just not enough, though, in the end. And Texas, it's not their dream season because they lost to Oklahoma, but all their dreams are still very much alive, and they in some ways control their own destiny. Certainly as far as the Big 12 goes, not as much necessarily with the college football playoff, but they are right there, like the first in line or second in line at that door if that door opens up for those 4 spots. So that was a win that they needed to keep those hopes alive. They're sitting pretty. But with the Jonathan Brooks injury and the fact that TCU made that a game the way they did, I do think there's a little bit of a concern about putting people away. I think that's a valid concern to have, but you just got to win them at the end of the day, and that's what Texas was able to do. And their defense is so freaking good, man, especially up front. It's silly how talented they are up front. That's just a mismatch that not a lot of teams in the country are going to be able to contend with. And when you get to the playoff, that's when you'll see teams that are able to have units more like that.
I love what I saw, what Texas did, though, when the game got a little bit dicey and TCU was with 3. It was third down, whatever, and they threw a fade to Mitchell, who's on his back diving, catches it, doesn't let the ground deflect. That's just a big boy play. That's what you do. I mean, that's what you do. You don't try to run a 5-yard play when you need 7. Be aggressive with it. And they felt like if they didn't make the catch, then you punt it away, and then you play defense.
If Texas were to get in the playoff, because of that defense, they're a bad matchup for Georgia and Michigan.
Defensive front,
yeah. Because of that defensive front, they're a bad matchup for Georgia and Michigan, particularly Michigan, because Michigan doesn't have guys that can beat you on the outside. Now, if they were to say wind up in the playoff playing Washington, that's probably the worst thing that could happen because Washington's
they played in the bowl game last year.
We don't need to throw. We don't want to run the ball that much anyway. We're just going to step back and throw it and make your secondary try and contain what we've got going on. That's interesting. Now, and it could be just they could wind up playing Oregon in a bowl game, and that game would be fantastic. And then that's a pretty even matchup to me either way around. But yeah, because of their defensive front, they're going to be able to withstand a lot of problems that could come around where, there's not going to be a team that can get a lead on them in the fourth quarter and reasonably expect to run out the clock.
Yeah, I mean, they're really stout against the run. TCU only had 88 rushing yards. I mean, I know Bonnie Bailey had 98, but then you count sacks and whatnot, and you end up with, less than 100 yards rushing for TCU. But yeah, I mean, I think there's still a little bit of concern about that secondary. But when, to your point, you match up and just you want to get into the battle of the trenches. Now, Michigan will have their say, or others will have their say. Alabama, Georgia, obviously, but yeah, I think Texas can walk in any of those battles and feel like, yeah, our dudes up front, especially on the defensive line, can go toe to toe with your guys and win a lot of those battles. I mean, there's NFL talent right there, and it's very obvious when you watch them. But yeah, I mean, TCU made it a game. Josh Hoover had some big pass plays late to make that exciting, but just not enough in the end, and should have had a lot more earlier on. I mean, it was 6-0 entering the fourth quarter. You do anything else earlier in that game, and maybe it's a different outcome rather than having to score 3 touchdowns and just wish there was more time remaining or that you could get one more stop. But I do think you mentioned Adonai Mitchell, and he's got a clutch gene that just not a lot of guys have. Like you can recruit 4-star wide receivers and expect them to be pretty good, but not everybody comes equipped with that ability to just make that big catch that can seal a game for you. And he's done that what feels like multiple times for them already this year. That was a huge first down catch that you were referring to put it away. And he's a really good player. That was a big pickup for them this offseason.
All right, so there was that game. The Oklahoma game against West Virginia, I was watching that. When we did the pregame, I went home. And, I mean, it was somewhat competitive, but that thing was over quickly. Gabriel and OU and OU's defense, they just mauled the Mountaineers.
It felt a little like the LSU-Florida game in that, West Virginia had a couple of, shots to take, and they, early on, you think okay, well, maybe if their defense plays like their defense has, and then before, the third water break their defense took, it was all over for them.
Yeah, I mean, Oklahoma just swarmed them. I mean, they were up big pretty quickly at halftime. I mean, that game was already pretty much out of reach, it felt like, the way that it had gone. So, I mean, that was just a harsh reality check for West Virginia. You've had a pretty good year, but rolling into Norman against a team that's had a couple of losses in a row and clearly knows it's now or never for this season. That was just a bad recipe for the Mountaineers to walk into. Oklahoma is a really good team. It's just that they've lost a couple of really tough games, but Drake Stoops had a monster showing. I mean, what a day for Drake Stoops. I should have mentioned with TCU, Savion Williams had a really nice day for them as well in the passing game. He had a big game that's worth mentioning. Josh Hoover, you see little signs with him that he could be pretty good when all is said and done. But going back to OU, Drake Stoops, monster day for him with 164 yards and 3 touchdowns on 10 catches, able to run the ball really effectively as well, with Gavin Sawchuk being the main star there. Gabriel obviously had a huge day. So, yeah, just way too much Sooners. They were the better team, and there was just no answer for that offense.
All right, Kansas State mauled Baylor. It was at one point like 38-19, and at least like, oh, okay. Yeah, and then all of a sudden you had a pick six, and you had a this and that. There was, I think, a scoop and score, and that thing got out of hand, as really was not surprising whatsoever. A nice bounce-back win for the Wildcats after the tough loss in Austin the week before.
I mean, Blake Shapen threw 4 touchdowns, which he's never done before, so that's cool. That's about all you take away from this game, though, was, hey, that was neat. Good record for you. And Dawson Pendergrass caught a couple of touchdowns. Cool for him. There's little individual moments, and that's all you can really take away from this game. Guys, I don't know how they keep doing this. I really do. I do not know how they keep doing this. I know they can for the next couple of weeks. They have no choice. The TCU game's a big rivalry game. But I felt like even watching Dave Aranda in the postgame that there's a guy who, at least in the past few weeks, and fans didn't want to hear it and they were tired of hearing it, but he at least seemed as though there were reasons that he believed in and things that were happening behind the scenes that he believed in, that this was all still going not according to plan, but it was still in their control, so to speak. That seemed like a man who had absolutely no answers and no idea of where to turn next in the postgame. And I don't blame him, because you just got nearly 60 hung on you. And if Kansas State wanted to, they could have pushed it down and pushed it past 60 if they really had wanted to. You had a touchdown there at the very end of the game that made that even a 34-point game. It was going to be a 40-plus point loss. And then Monterey Baldwin, his one catch on the day, comes at the very end of the game, a little 6-yard touchdown. Besides that, he was non-existent. I mean, you really have to, just go well, Dominic Richardson had 89 yards. That's cool. Like I said, Shapen had 4, but that's all you walk away with. There's no, they're better, they're getting better, this is turning the corner, there's hope for the future. There's none of that after that game. It's just a big old butt whooping that you could see coming from a mile away. But the problem is now even the one guy who you didn't really believe, but you're like, oh, he's the head coach. Okay, he knows where this is going. Even he doesn't sound like he has an answer now at this point. So I don't know, man. I don't know how you keep running this back besides the next couple of games and expect everybody to just stick with this thing.
Mac Rhodes will join us tomorrow.